talk to everybody tonight. I'm going to open by sharing with all of you a little personal story. I believe that I'm pretty good at what I do and that I understand my kids because I'm a twice exceptional learner. I was identified at the age of 4 as intellectually gifted, but I was an odd little duck. Kind of didn't fit the mold, and everybody thought I was clumsy and you know, falling all over myself. And people are like, she's so little and she falls down all the time. And just never quite was that, you know, I was that square peg in the round hole. And it turns out I have a visual processing disorder that was not identified until I was 42. Explains a lot about what I could and could not do as a student, explains a lot about the work ethic I developed. And so
Dr. Ferry, sorry
Yeah.
to interrupt. This is my only interruption. I wanted to say on that note, we do have a commitment to do a similar talk for visual processing coming up this year.
Cool. Because that's another area that it's a hidden disability and nobody knew. And mine was diagnosed when my daughter's was diagnosed at 7. She had therapy. She has no visual processing issues. I still do. And so when my kids are in my office and I hear the descriptions of the behaviors and I'm like, yeah, I am you. I was you. And I make a point of trying to tell my students, I point up at the diplomas and I say, see, you know, I turned out okay. So I thank you all for letting me have an opportunity to talk about this area of audiology. I was never going to be an artist, so I guess I had to go this direction, and have been fascinated by this topic since I was a graduate student. And I've spent my entire career in assessment and treatment of central auditory processing disorders among children and adults. That's my area of research focus, as well as professional and clinical training for audiology students. And what I want to talk about is this process of processing. And I'd like to try to convince you, wait a minute, can I make this move? Yes, there we go. That we've been looking at these disorders since at least 1954. It was Sam Orton, and most of you know that name, who first suggested back in the late 30s that the learning challenges of children were related in some fashion to their auditory capabilities. And there was a lot of research then on neurologic underpinnings of these skill sets, particularly among adults. And it was in 1954 that Michael Buss pointed out that if we do not get to the bottom of the diagnosis, that you've got kids that are coming to us with a variety of issues and they're presenting in a variety of different fashions, that we're going to lose them, and that we need to have a differential diagnosis and look at all of the process by which we use sensory information. And we know from all the research that auditory issues can adversely affect your academic success, your ability to communicate, and in fact, your psychosocial wellness, that auditory issues affect communication, and by extension, then your ability to interact with your peers and in various social settings, which can then lead to feelings of anxiety, depression, withdrawal, aggression. I had an 8-year-old who was suicidal. This is pretty severe stuff. And so it's important that we not just look at symptomatology and say, oh, you're squiggling around in your chair, it must be ADD. Oh, you didn't hear, you didn't follow the directions, that's an auditory processing disorder. Oh, you didn't do what I told you to do, that's non-compliant behavior. And so I'd like to convince you all that this is a truly a continuum of skill sets. Not a great picture here, but one that I find very effective when I talk to my parents about the areas that I work with. This represents the skill sets about which we're talking. The ear here on the left-hand side represents the peripheral auditory mechanism. So your outer ear, middle ear, inner ear, and the auditory nerve. That part of the system is responsible for collecting sound, detecting sound, and then turning it into an electrical signal that the brainstem and brain can use. And on the right-hand side here, you see the brainstem and the brain. And it doesn't matter who's doing the listening, when or where or to what. We all have to do all 5 of these things with the information. We have to be able to attend to it. And I'm not interested in that, oh yeah, I'm listening to you. I'm looking at some feeder skills that are really low in the system that contribute to our ability to selectively attend to a target and ignore extraneous noise, or to shift our attention from one speaker to another. Now, contribute is the operative word there. This is not the be all end all, because those skills are under the control of the frontal lobes in terms of the ultimate success. But if there's a breakdown here at this lowest level in the auditory system, you will not be able to selectively attend or to divide your attention effectively. Discrimination is an analytic skill. As that signal's coming in from the ear, all the cells along the way are going to pull out pitch cues and loudness cues and timing cues, because those are the 3 characteristics of every sound: pitch, loudness, timing. So that by the time it gets to your brain, you have the sounds you need, your k, your a, your t, whatever the sounds are. Integration is the opposite of that. Integration is synthesis. So instead of just sound, 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 I'm going to pull all that information together, largely thanks to the fact that the right hemisphere talks to the left hemisphere across the big fiber tract, the corpus callosum. And all of a sudden now the at turns into cat, or act, or tack, whatever order it might have come in. Once I've got my parts and I've pulled them all together, then I can tell you what it means. I can say, oh, you said cat. I know what a cat is, and now I can do something with it. I can repeat the word. I can answer your question. I can put things in the right order. I can point to the picture. I can laugh at your joke. Everything that relates to executing a response. So this really is a continuum of skills that starts at the ear and ends when we do something with it. So your 3 main component pieces are what we hear. What's the auditory system doing with the signal? Detect it, analyze it, synthesize it. Then I'm going to move that information into my language centers, where I'm going to attach meaning, and I'm going to pull it together with other knowledge that I have. So now it's about what I know. And then I'm going to use my linguistic, cognitive, my thinking and reasoning skills to organize that information and execute a response. Wait, sorry, I got to go back. So there we go. So a breakdown anywhere along the way is, in the broadest definition, a processing problem. However, if the problem's all the way back here in the what we hear, that's an auditory processing problem, because it's about what I hear, what my brain hears. If the problem's here in the middle, it's more appropriately referred to as a language processing problem. If the problem's all the way up here, it's very likely something that relates to executive functioning. And so when we see a student who presents with, for example, dyslexia, dyslexia, broad term. By definition, dyslexia means disordered language. I get referrals from my neuropsych colleagues that have identified dysphonetic dyslexia, and they've sent them to me for testing, because dysphonetic dyslexia implies a breakdown here at the auditory, or something that might be more linguistic. Dyseidetic dyslexia would be a visual processing problem that kind of drives the bus. So when we talk about, and parents will say, well, is this dyslexia? It's not my call to make. That's outside of my scope of practice to say it's dyslexia. What I can tell you is that these dyslexic characteristics that have been identified by a neuropsychologist or an LD professional may well be driven by an underlying auditory processing disorder, or something that more relates to language. One of the most interesting things I've found in my career is that neuropsychologists will identify students as having a nonverbal learning disability. And nonverbal learning disability cannot be diagnosed unless there's a prosodic component, inability to use tone of voice and appreciate sarcasm. Well, no offense to my neuropsych buddies, but a prosodic deficit is an auditory problem. If you can't hear the change in the pitch of somebody's voice, you have no hope of attaching meaning to it and no hope of using that information. If you can't hear the difference between a T and a K, you're going to have a lot of trouble figuring out the phonics that goes with that, and then sounding out words, and then reading fluently. And so these auditory skill sets play a contributory role in the entire process. Are they the be all end all? No, because it's an extremely dynamic system. Another way to look at this is to look at it as a stack of skills. Sensory processing on the bottom, auditory, visual, tactile, taste, smell. These represent the foundational senses by which we take in the world. Language and learning sit on top of that. I'm going to use my language to make sense of all this sensory information, and then I'm going to use that to learn, to read or spell or write. And then the executive functions are at the top, helping us keep all of our ducks in a row. So you can have a student with a sensory issue like myself, visual processing problem, but I don't have any issues up here. None at all. I'm way ahead of the game in terms of language and executive skills. I just worked around it. You can have a problem up here, makes you look like you can't hear. And so the whole point then is to do a differential diagnosis in order to find out what's driving the bus. So this process requires then an intact peripheral system to get that signal in to the brain. I need an intact central auditory nervous system to get through the brain and into the cortex. I need my phonemic knowledge so that I can say, oh, that was cat, or that was a C, that was an A. I mean, we all know some of those phonics rules don't make a lot of sense. I need my linguistic knowledge to get that picture in my head of what a cat is, and use my experience. And if I don't have any experiential knowledge of cats, then I'm going to have a hard time really coming to an understanding of what a cat is. You think back to the movie The Miracle Worker, and Anne Sullivan bemoaning the fact that she was teaching Helen Keller all of those hand movements that she could imitate, but Sullivan was deeply frustrated because Helen Keller didn't understand what they meant. She could mimic them, but she couldn't go that next step until finally the breakthrough moment where she figured out that this wet stuff coming out of this pump, that's water, and that's what water meant. And so we start at the periphery, we get it into the brainstem, we pull things apart, we put them back together again. I add my phonics, I know what something is, and then I let my executive skills help me maintain my focus even when the information's difficult, help me control an impulsive response, help me organize, help me regulate my behaviors, and I'm good to go. So, as I said before, we know these disorders can adversely affect academics and communication and how we feel about ourselves. Certainly reading, spelling, you can't spell what you cannot hear. You will not be able to read fluently if you cannot perceive tone of voice, because reading fluently requires that I put the emphasis on the right words and put the right weight. As I said, feelings of withdrawal and anxiety in social situations if I can't communicate well. And then just daily listening skills, following directions in class, being able to participate in a group learning experience, talking on the phone with friends. Now, because this is an extremely dynamic system and it's a continuum, you're going to have a lot of overlap. And I want to show you a non-exhaustive list. This is what auditory disorders can look like. It looks like attention deficit disorder because kids with ADD can be distractible and inattentive and disorganized. So can kids with auditory processing problems. It looks like executive function disorder, poor memory, not good at strategies. Behavior disorders. You have a kid who's being oppositional. Are you sure they're oppositional? Or are they just taking you a little too literally? Because you said 5 minutes, and that's not what you meant, but that's what you said. And so now they're argumentative. I had a youngster that the speech pathologist was working on perseveration, and they said she tells the same stories over and over again. I told the mom, I said, no, she doesn't. I said, listen to them. I said, every single story will differ in one tiny detail. Mom called back a couple of weeks later. She said, how'd you know that? I said, because she's got a processing disorder that doesn't let her appreciate the telling of a story, big picture. She was relating fact, 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 fact that she had memorized. And if she left out one of the facts, she didn't know how to go back in there and say, oh, did I forget to tell you the guy was wearing a yellow hat? So instead, she just started back at the beginning and repeated everything and tried to reinsert the piece she'd missed. If I asked any of you who are listening to, as quickly as possible, tell me right now what letter comes after L. Those of you who pulled it up really quickly are good integrators. Anybody in the audience who had to back up and start at A and move through, your integration is not quite as good, because alphabet is the whole thing. There's 26 pieces of information in there. And if I memorize the 26, then I can only deal with them a piece at a time. But if I learn it as a whole, well, then I can move in and out, and I can say, oh, LM, and oh, what letters after you? TVW, and I can just move in and around. Social pragmatic language problems. If you're not good at reading the I call them non-speech cues that are there because they're verbal, reading that tone of voice for sarcasm, or you won't get the jokes. As I mentioned before, prosody is an element of nonverbal learning disability. And certainly we know that our students with auditory processing problems very often will show issues in phonologic awareness and their pragmatic language. So if we've got all these different disorders that have all this shared symptomatology, first question is why? Easy answer. One brain, many skills. And so they all have to work together. So you're going to get shared symptomatology. So the only way to figure out what's your predominant issue is to do a differential diagnosis. So how do I differentiate these disorders from ADD, for example? Do a test. Attention deficit disorder is a checklist diagnosis. I go through the checklist and you have all these behaviors. Somebody says you're ADD. Student comes into my office, I'm looking for a specific profile. My kids with attention deficit disorder either do really, really poorly on absolutely everything I ask them to do because the ADD suppresses all their auditory skills, or they blast through everything and are scoring off the charts because the attention is no longer an issue, and I can control for that. So we can use our test results together as a team, what the neuropsych came up with, what the speech pathologist came up with, what I add to the mix. And so we're going to do a differential diagnosis to differentiate among these disorders that have similar symptomatology. And your gifted students with whom you all work, they do then mask in terms of, in certain testing situations, they will rely on their strengths and they'll make you think there's not a problem. No one, and admittedly, I predate the law, okay, so the idea of a visual processing disorder was not really on anybody's radar, but you give me a test I can think my way out of, I don't have any visual processing problems. You give me something that is very specific to visual perception only, and you don't let me use my higher order skills, I'm done. Because it's not about my intelligence, it's about the sensory system not operating efficiently. If I have enough extra to work with, I have no issue. If I'm in a situation where everything hinges on, could you tell the difference between that T and K when you looked at it? Last week on my crossword puzzle, could not for the life of me figure out the answer to one that circles many words. And I'm like, one that circles many words, 6 letters, ends in OR. I'm like, editor, no, 7 letters, I guess. And I'm like, editor, that didn't work. And then I got EQ. And I'm like, okay, that's the equator. And I'm like, one that circles many words. No, it didn't say many words. It said many worlds. I missed the L when I looked at it. So I'm going to come into this differential evaluation with some very specific tests that are going to look at these central auditory processes. My buddies in speech path are going to bring the phonetic, phonemic, the language tests, maybe some memory, maybe some listening comprehension. Psychologists are going to bring in some tests for cognitive function, working memory, processing speed, attention, listening, the other sensory. Parents are going to provide information about what they're seeing their children do on a daily basis. Teachers, social workers, OT, PT, everybody's going to bring their piece of information so that we can find patterns across all this testing that will identify a deficit-specific disorder of some kind. I'm specifically looking for patterns to emerge in my testing. I'm going to compare my listeners' performance to an age-matched peer group. Within normal limits is good. Outside normal limits is potential problem. I'm looking at where you do well and where you struggle for these patterns to emerge to tell me either, hey, your auditory skills are fine, or no, wait a minute, you're not very good at integrating what you hear. You're not very good at attaching meaning to it. You're not very good at analyzing it. So that then I can come up with some deficit-specific intervention. There's going to be some general things we're going to do with all kids. You know, preferential seating is a nice idea. Certainly multisensory learning environments, reduction of noise, but not everybody benefits from extra visual cues. And not everybody needs to sit at the front of the room. And certainly not all of them need assistive listening technology. So there are some specific kinds of things we're going to do based on the type of deficit. And we're going to look now at therapy. We've been doing auditory oral rehabilitation with our students since the 50s, started with adults and then moved into kids. And now with the onset of computer technology, much of that therapy has gone online. And there's an app for that. And so we can prescribe for our students auditory training programs. Some are somewhat general. Others have more of a discrim-based emphasis. Some are very specific to right hemisphere auditory function. And some are very specific to how well the two sides of the brain communicate with each other. And so we are finding that depending on who you read, some of the research is saying 15 hours of auditory training. There's one program on the market that's set up to be 45 hours of training. So that's kind of our window, but that's not a lot of time. I mean, 20 minutes a day, every day of the week, a couple hours a week. You're talking about 4 or 5 months of auditory training, and I can turn an impaired listener into a normal auditory processor. This is for 80% of the time. It's that exciting in terms of this data. And my thought is that if there's an auditory component that is contributing, it may not be the linchpin, but it may be contributing. If I can get that stone out of my student's shoe, then the Wilson program you're trying, or Lexia, or straight up Orton Gillingham, or Slingerland, or Slant, or the spelling program you're trying, or the writing program you're trying, all of those programs now have a better chance of giving you more bang for the buck, because I got rid of that underlying sensory issue that was was just exacerbating the situation. All right, so this is your continuum here, and it kind of shows you who's doing what with whom. I'm over here. My audiology colleagues and I are hanging out over here. Speech path, learning disabilities, psych and neuropsych are kind of up on this side, looking at language processing, linguistic cognitive. Here in the middle, that phoneme, that phonemic area is shared by audiology and speech path. I don't do phonologic testing. I rely on my speech path colleagues to provide that component. Other places in the country, audiologists do provide phonologic testing as part of their evals. I don't have to because my speech path buddies put it in there for me. Some psychs will put it in, the CTOP and the PAT, so the comprehensive test of phonologic processing, and the phonologic awareness test will give you a lot of good information about phonology. I mentioned that we're going to have differential deficit specific intervention. Has to be a balance of treatment and management. Treatment to reduce the deficit itself, management to minimize the impact in the real world, everything based on the science and following logically from the test results. We're an evidence-based practice, so it's got to be both. And if it's not both, then it's not going to be effective. This is my screening test. I should have mentioned, full disclosure, I'm the co-author of this. This is the screener for auditory processing disorders, and it screens based on the continuum. We've got 8 subtests. 3 of them are acoustic, 2 of them are phonemic, 3 of them are language. The whole idea is that spend about 35 minutes, run the kids through this screening measure and get a better idea if we need to send them for a central auditory processing eval, if we need more deep testing in language, if we need more deep testing with respect to phonics. So not to put myself out of business, but we designed this, Dr. Richard and I designed this thing for non-audiologists. We designed it for speech pathologists, special ed professionals, learning disabilities professionals, neuropsych, psychology, to again get a better feel of where you need to spend more time and do more testing. So my battery is designed to determine how efficiently the central auditory system operates by overworking it. Okay, there's a million cells in that system that can do this work. And so the only way to find out how well it works is to overwork it. Tests are appropriate for children as young as 6. From a diagnostic standpoint, I see kids as young as 4. My 4 and 5-year-olds, it is a screener because there are skills there at 4 and 5 that we do not expect to be developmentally apparent yet. But by the time you're 6, everything that should be there by 6. Going to compare results to same age peers. I'm looking at good scores and poor scores to get an idea of what's going on. And we're asking our kids to do tasks that are cognitively very simple. Tell me what you hear. Linguistically very easy. Vocabulary that is pre-K to no harder than 3rd grade, depends on the age of the listener. Certainly my 6 and 7-year-olds are getting the pre-K, kindergarten vocabulary. My somewhat older kids are getting 3rd grade. Even adults, the tests aren't any harder than, or the vocab's not any harder than 3rd grade. There are no visual cues to help you or hurt you. Guessing is encouraged. Time is not an issue. I don't care how long it takes you to do it, just get it right. But we are maximizing the skills of the central auditory nervous system. And I tell my students all the time that we're looking at it geographically, that I'm going through this system and I'm probing integrity of the outer ear, the middle ear, the inner ear, the auditory nerve, the brainstem, the right hemisphere, the left hemisphere, and the connections in between. And I'm mostly interested in the processes that are being taxed because that's the functionality that we're looking for. But I'm always keeping in mind the underlying anatomy, because there have been instances where the audiologist has been the one who identified a demonstrable neurologic disorder. Several years ago, one of my graduate students who was finishing up her last day, she was getting some very strange results, and she called to me from the other room to come and take a look. And of course, she's a graduate student. My first reaction is she messed something up. And so we rechecked, and nope, we identified a low brainstem tumor that was growing on her eighth nerve that was affecting her ability to process information. They did surgery, got rid of the tumor. Now, getting rid of the tumor, they had to sacrifice the nerve on that side, so it left her with a hearing loss. But for processing, it was better because we were able to get rid of the tumor. So we can find real neurologic problems. I don't want to go through all these. I just wanted to put this graph up to kind of show you how we work through this. I'm starting with just regular hearing testing. Raise your hand when you hear the tone. We're doing a tympanogram, which is a measure of how well the eardrum's moving back and forth. Reflexes are just the same kind of things when the doctor hits your knee with the little hammer. It's a loud sound popped into the ear. I'm looking for the eardrum to jump a little. And the regular hearing test is peripheral. When you get into tympanogram and reflexes, we're starting to cross the line into central. I'm asking my listeners to deal with targets that are really, really hard to hear. Filtered speech sounds like a bad cell phone connection. Time compressed speech. Woman's voice, she talks really, really fast. Makes it really hard to tell the difference between bike and bite, pig and peg, fish and dish. We have some tasks that are specifically designed to look at brainstem function. These are a little hard to explain. They involve sort of odd targets at each ear, and you have to sort of put them together. And it happens to be a low brainstem function, but not, and it will tell me something about how well you can find sounds in space and how well you can filter the noise out and filter out signals and look for that sound you need. Moving up into the cortex, we have all these, you see the word dichotic here. Dichotic is a Greek word. Di is two, chotic means chaos. So these are two or more different signals at each ear. Digits, different numbers in each ear, rhyming words, consonant vowel, pa, ga at each ear. This little thing, the staggered spondee, the spondee is a two-syllable word with equal stress. So toothbrush, baseball, hot dog, as opposed to above, below, beside. Those are unequal stress. So you're hearing a two-syllable word that overlaps between the two ears. Competing words, just two different words. Competing sentences, different sentences each ear. You're going to tell me one and ignore the other. For all of these, you have to tell me everything. For sentences, you're telling me one versus the other, and I'm going to get a lot of information about what's going on at the cortex. Then I have all my temporal tasks. Temporal's timing. Visual signals are simultaneous. Tactile is, for the most part, kind of simultaneous. You can hold something in your hand. Auditory signals are ding, 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 and they come in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then they're gone. And so if you don't catch them right when, within like 300 milliseconds and do something with it, you're not going to do anything with it. So these are tests that deal with timing, processing, pitch and duration patterns, pitch patterns. High, high, low, 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 high, low, high. Duration patterns. Sounds like Morse code. Long, short, 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 long. These tests tap into right hemisphere pattern recognition function and left hemisphere language skills and how well the two sides of the brain work together. Because if the task is name that tune, right side gives me the music, left side gives me the words I need, corpus callosum lets the two sides talk to each other and I can tell you what it is. If I only want you to imitate the pattern for me, that's right hemisphere work. So I can use these tests to figure out if a problem is right hemisphere, left hemisphere, or the connective tissue between. Random gap and gaps in noise. This is a tough one to explain. Let me see if I can do this. The word string has 5 sounds. There's s, r, ng, 5 sounds there. And the end of the S feeds into the beginning of the T. That feeds in the end of the T, then goes into the end of the R, or beginning of the R. So there are boundaries there between the end of one sound and the beginning of another. And if you can't perceive that perceptual boundary, you won't hear it as string. You'll hear it as something just blurry. One of my clients told me one time, my Hannah came to me when she was about 5, and she said, Mama, I have something very important to tell you. And I said, what? She said, do you know it's LMNO? I said, yeah. She said, no, Mama. She said, there are 4 different words. They're not just 4 different sounds. They're not just one great big one. And I said, yes, I know that. And she said, that is so cool. And I thought, that is so cool, because she was 5 and her little brain could finally figure out that there were in fact 4 different sounds there, because she could perceive the gap. She could perceive the space between the end of one sound and the beginning of another. And we have students who cannot do that. They cannot perceive the boundaries between the end of one sound, the beginning of another, the end of one word, the beginning of another, which makes for them, speech just sounds like one kind of blurry mess, and none of it makes any sense. The Rocky and Bullwinkle cartoon from many years ago played with this as a phenomenon. They all went to what's the matter you for school, which is what's the matter with you, all squished together, and those boundaries have been blurred. And so if you can't do this, then speech isn't going to sound like speech, and music's not going to sound like music. It's all just going to sound like noise. We do some speech and noise testing. The processes that are attached to speech and noise are highly variable, and the underlying site with listening and noise is highly variable. Every client who has ever walked into my office has, quote, trouble in background noise. And then my questions are things like, how loud's the noise? What kind of noise? Where's it coming from? What are you doing? Because those are the 4 biggies in terms of dealing with noise. How loud is it? If it's louder than the speech, it's hard to hear. If it's the same kind of noise, speech on speech is harder than white noise on speech. If the noise is coming from exactly the same location as the target, going to have a hard time hearing the target. But the other big one is task demands. We've all been there, that we're watching Dancing with the Stars and pretty colors and nice lights and not a lot of neural load. Make as much noise as you want, I don't care, because there's not a lot of work going on. You're watching one of these programs that has a complicated plot line and new characters are coming in all the time. And you're like, okay, shh, because someone is breathing too loudly, okay? These clients, a lot of them have misophonia. Misophonia is another Greek word. It literally means hate sound. Miso is Greek for hate. Phonia is Greek for sound. It means hate sound. Hate's too strong a word, dislike, intolerance. We've got listeners who complain of misophonia. I get calls saying, do you treat misophonia? My next question is, need to find out if what's going on. Are you misophonic because you have hypersensitive hearing, that you actually can hear sounds that other people can't? Are you misophonic because your reflexes are all messed up and too much sound is getting in? Are you misophonic because you have problems perceiving gaps in words and you get overloaded in situations, and so the neural load is increased and I can't hear myself think, okay? Or are you misophonic because you have an executive function issue that relates to your ability to regulate your emotional response? Children, very, very young children, don't like vacuum cleaners and fire engines and fireworks and barking dogs. Okay. Don't like fire alarms. None of us do. They're made that way. It's to make us get out of the way. Don't like the vacuum. Nah. Don't like fireworks. That's too loud. Don't like the sound that the dryers in a public bathroom make. because they're designed to be really loud, and it's a really lot of hard surface. It's so you'll go away and not hang out in the bathroom too much. So there is a developmental appropriateness to not liking certain sounds when you're a little kid because you're trying to figure out what the heck they are. And then certainly a sudden, unexpected sound going to make any of us jump, and we might not like it, but that's the reflex kicking in to protect us. But, getting upset because somebody's chewing too loudly, or I don't like the sound of the fluorescent lights, or I'm bothered by sound, but only when I'm taking a test. These are issues that relate more to processing of some kind than possibly the system. And so we can look at the test results and help to determine if this misophonia, this dislike of sound, where's it coming from? It's not a processing problem in and of itself, but misophonia is certainly an auditory symptom that something is amiss. And so we're going to use the testing to figure out what might be driving the bus. I'm 65 years old, and the sound for me is the noise that styrofoam makes when it comes out of a cardboard box. I hate that sound. I leave the room. I made Hannah put something away the other day because it was in a cardboard. It was cardboard and styrofoam. And she said, you have to do this on your own. And I said, no, I don't. You're here. You do it for me. See, I hate that sound. I don't know why. It just bothers me. There's some speculation. A couple of different folks are looking at the possibility that it has something to do with it's called the non-classic auditory system, and how the non-classic system communicates with the limbic system. But there's not a lot of research, and it's still sort of kind of fringe out there, but we're working on it. But you got to find out first, if you're talking about dislikes of sound and misophonia, you got to find out first why before you start investing in noise canceling earplugs or some of these programs that claim they can cure that, or pharmacological solutions. Some of that stuff that's out there isn't grounded in good science. So got to have the assessment. I don't ever want to overtest kids, but if we don't know why something's going on, then we need to do some testing, because then we're going to not waste resources on the back end. I had a nurse come in one day, she's a 45-year-old. She said to me, you didn't ask me to repeat complex directions in background noise. I said, no, I did not. She said, well, why not? I said, you told me you can't. So well, you have to test it. I said, no, I don't. I said, the only reason to test it is if I didn't believe you when you told me you can't do it. I said, I believe you when you tell me you can't do it. I said, you didn't come to me to validate what you told me. I said, you came to me to find out why you can't follow directions in background noise, not that you can't follow directions. So that's my testing, all designed to differentiate across these different labels, and not to get rid of any of them. It's not my job to say somebody's not on the autistic spectrum, or to say that somebody's not ADD or it's not dyslexia. My job is to evaluate the auditory system and provide everybody else with some information about how the auditory skills feed into these other diagnoses. And what are we going to do about the auditory impairment if it's there? So how does the auditory capabilities factor into a diagnosis of dyslexia? How does auditory processing exacerbate and be exacerbated by a diagnosis of ADD? What do our kids who've been diagnosed on the spectrum bring to the table in terms of their auditory skills? How can we manage a noise intolerance if it's an auditory driven issue and not a psychosocial problem? But we've got to figure out the nature of the beast first, which leads me now to intervention. So this is my model. It's called the M3 model for intervention for processing disorders. I was going to call it 3M, but those people up in Minnesota said no, I couldn't do that. So it's M3 because it's message, what we listen to, medium, the environment in which we do our listening, which is air, that's the medium, and then me, what do I bring to the table? And effective communication requires all three of these. If there's a negative in any area, if I don't understand the words you're using, communication is going to break down. If there's too much noise or distraction that gets in the way of my hearing you, communication is going to break down. If I can't see you, if I have impaired auditory skills, communication potentially breaks down. But conversely, therapeutically, then I can, and from an intervention standpoint, I can improve the environment, helps communication. I can fix the message. I can alter the message. I can improve the message, helps communication. I can do therapy to improve my ability to use visual cues to help me communicate. I can do therapy to help improve the ability to tolerate background noise and not feel like I need to go run screaming from the room because somebody's pulling styrofoam out of a cardboard box. I can get control of that. I can do therapy to become a better discriminator or a better integrator, or I can talk to my colleagues in speech pathology about learning rules for language so that I don't take everything literally and I'm better able to deal with abstract concepts. So that's what we've got going on here, is a three-sided kind of a situation. Positive changes positively affect communication. Negative changes negatively affect communication. I like to think of it as a tripod then in terms of the intervention. We've got direct remediation that focuses on the listener. You've got compensatory strategies where I'm going to focus on the message. What am I hearing? What am I supposed to be learning? And then we have environmental modifications. What's the room like? What's the classroom like? What's the, riding in the car is hard. You can't hear from the backseat of the car. Sit in the backseat sometimes. You'll know exactly what your kids are going through. You can't hear from back there. Sound goes straight out of your mouth, hits the windshield, and then it curls back in the back. And it sounds like a hot mess back there, especially in cars that have more than just the back seat, if they've got, multiple row seating. So we need all three in order for this to stand up. If I do therapy and I put a student in a crummy learning environment, it's a waste of my time having done the therapy. If I teach you compensatory strategies and I improve the environment, okay. But if I never work on the skill set, best I can hope for is that you won't get any further behind, but I won't solve the issue. I still have a visual processing problem because I never had therapy. Hannah doesn't. She had 16 weeks therapy. It's done and done. If I have therapy in a nice environment, but I don't let you compensate for your issues, everything falls apart. So we need all three. All right. Management then modify the environment, use those compensatory strategies, minimize the impact on life, be able to learn. So find a different way to learn to read, add visual cues, minimize background noise, improve the learning and communication environment and situation so I can keep learning despite the fact that I have this processing problem. And then over here in remediation, combination of formal and informal therapy that's going to work that deficit skill area to improve it. And in many cases, I'm going to be teaching compensatory strategies. Now, maybe not me, maybe it'll be the LD teacher, or it'll be the social worker, or it could be the occupational therapist or the speech pathologist. But we're bringing in some compensatory strategies in tangent and in tandem with the therapy we're doing in order to reduce that deficit, get that stone out of the shoe so that I can look back and say, yeah, I had an auditory processing problem when I was a kid, but I don't have one anymore. And that's what I want my kids to tell me. I had an 8-year-old come back after about 5 weeks of his therapy. He'd been doing one of the online programs. And I asked him how things were going. And he proceeded to tell me what level he was at every one of the games. And I'm like, okay, too much information, but fine. And I said, but how are things? And he said, you mean like at school? I said, yes. And he said, oh, Dr. Ferry, I can hear gooder now. And I'm like, all right, gooder is good. I'll take gooder all day. All day. We'll take gooder all day. Got to work on his syntax, but I was happy with, I can hear gooder now. And our research is showing that 80% of our kids with abnormal specific auditory impairment, short-term intervention can normalize that, and they come out the other side with normal auditory processing. And then you move on to other areas that need work. Now we've got 20% that are still stuck. And in that case, well, then we got to really focus on compensation and environment, and maybe assistive technology, that kind of thing. All right. Your therapy, your management can go bottom up or it can go top down. Central auditory processing disorders are basically bottom up problems. They're what the system is doing, not the listener. Your auditory system isn't doing a good job. Language issues, learning issues, executive issues, they're higher up. So they're more top down. And so bottom up therapies are stimulus driven. They're drill, 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 drill. You're doing it for the sake of doing it until you do it better. Top down is more concept driven. So I had a week of golf lessons many, many years ago. My mother-in-law had paid for them. At the end of the week, the guy said, I don't get it. He said, you seem to know what you're supposed to do. You seem to know how to do it. But you just can't seem to hit that little ball. And my brain went ding, 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 ding. He's trying to teach me to play golf. I have a PhD. I'm pretty smart. I understand the game. Can't see the little ball. Don't need golf lessons. Need vision therapy. Saw a baseball game. Kid had a batting average of like, I don't know, 1. It was awful. It was 109 or something. And the one guy said, don't understand why his batting average is so poor. He takes batting practice for like an hour every day. And the other announcer said, yeah, but he doesn't know how to swing a bat. And my brain went ding, 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 ding. He's getting bottom up therapy. Swing the bat, swing the bat, swing the bat. He needs to learn how to swing the bat. So what you want for most of your kids here, and for most of our kids here, we're going to probably have a combination of bottom up and top down. The more bottom up the deficit, the more bottom up the treatment's going to be. The more top down the deficit, the more top down the treatment. There was a really cool session when I was at LDA. I had some time before I was doing my thing. So I went to a session from a neuropsychologist. He was talking about intervention for executive function disorders. Happened to be the guy who's like the co-author of the brief, which I thought was kind of cool. Anyway, he was talking about the most recent research looking at intervention for EF issues. And he was specifically talking about CogMed. CogMed's been around for a while. It's a computer-based, it's an online program. It claims that it can improve executive function. And the research in the area of executive function is specific to executive function. The research in the area of executive function is saying that bottom-up drill type therapy, you get better at the games you're playing in these programs, but it doesn't carry over to real life. That the therapy for EF issues needs to come top down, and that you need coaching and strategy work and talk therapy, very cognitive, very linguistic, very concept driven. Whereas therapy for an auditory discrimination problem where I can't hear the difference between T's and K's and P's and B's, I can drill the heck out of that and it will work. So discrim issues, more bottom-up problem, needs more bottom-up therapy with a little bit of top-down. EF issues, more top-down problems, needs top-down therapy with a little bit of drilly type stuff, maybe to just reinforce. So we have to think about the nature of the problem, and then we have to look at some of these therapies that we're putting into play that, and some that cost a fortune. And before we spend that kind of money, we want to ask ourselves, does this problem really need bottom-up intervention, or does it need more top-down? So this is going to be very adaptive, very repetitive. Focus in management is on the signal. So clear speech, clear language, reduction of noise, maybe an assistive listening device to help with the signal to noise ratio, maybe noise canceling headphones or earplugs, but it's all about signal clarity. Focus here on more top down is communication, learning, grow your vocabulary, grow your strategies, thinking and reasoning, problem solving, working memory, figure it out, Wordle. Wordle is a kind of a, you think it's a bottom up, but Wordle is a top down. You got to really use your strategies for how to get to Wordle. Hannah always starts with audio, AUDIO, because it's got 4 vowels. And I always start with house because it has 3. And H and S are really common. And if I get an H, it's like, okay, and I get an S, it's like, I can narrow this down. She was very angry with me because yesterday or the day before I got tacit and I got it in 2, and she took 6, and I'm like, yes. So, but Wordle is a top-down kind of game because you really have to think about sounds and letters and spelling and what could it be and do some kind of problem solving. Whereas Angry Birds, empty calories, but it's bottom up. It's just not a lot of thinking in Angry Birds. You're just throwing birds around. So why bother to remediate? Well, I think I've already made my case. These are foundational skills that contribute to success in other skill areas. It can affect lots of areas: academics, psychosocial wellness. These are educationally relevant. This is what I harp on with my public school buddies, that you cannot meet the standards in speaking and listening if you've got a central auditory processing disorder. You just can't, because those say prepare for conversations. If I can't hear you talking, I can't prepare very well. Integrate is one of the pillars of speaking and listening. Integrate information. One of the other ones, the third one, is appreciate a speaker's tone of voice, or a written material's tone of voice. If I've got a prosodic deficit, I can't appreciate tone of voice, and I won't be able to enter a debate with somebody because I'm not catching your tone of voice. I think you're yelling at me when you're just excited. So these are educationally relevant. The therapy I'm recommending is not clinical. It is educationally relevant therapy. And the argument is that if these deficits reduce the efficiency of the system, then I'm going to have to overuse my higher level skills. I read everything 3 times. Everybody thought when I was a kid that the reason I read everything 3 times is because I was some sort of a perfectionist. Nope. I read everything 3 times because some part of my brain said you need to read everything 3 times. Now, any of you who are listening in who've gotten a report from me, I read it 3 times. I probably still sent it with a typo because I still miss them. I opened up one today and I'm like, I can't believe I wrote it was 962%, because it wasn't. And I looked right at it, didn't see that I missed it. So you have to overuse your higher order resources if there's a problem at the front door. So the central nervous system's plastic. It will adapt and change. It's most plastic during the first 2 decades of life, but it remains plastic throughout the lifespan. And you can teach an old dog new tricks. Will you get back to, what a 25-year-old can do? Probably not, but you can make things better. So even among adults, we can put in some auditory training and improve the communication skills, improve life skills, workplace accommodations. One of the questions was, what are we going to do as an adult if you do this testing? Well, knowledge is power. So when I found out I had a visual processing problem, it changed a lot. I don't beat myself up when I make the typo still occasionally, but I don't get so angry with myself for doing it. Get out of the car and the car's not quite square in that parking space, close enough for government work. And I just don't get too freaked out about it anymore because I know where it's coming from, and I do still try to compensate it. It's not that I just don't stress as much. I'm much more relaxed than I used to be. But I could still do visual therapy even at my age and probably improve. And I still do. I do some of my visual exercises mainly now to stave off the effects of aging. I'm not trying to get back to, what a normal 21-year-old visual processor can do. I'm just trying to keep it from getting any worse because my eyes are getting older. And so that's for my adult clients, the two different directions. One is, knowledge is power, and it can help explain a lot about what has happened in your life. And you might think about different accommodations, different compensations, workplace accommodations. I got one woman in an office with walls. She was in a cubicle, and we convinced the folks she needed a door. We got a radio. I got a police officer, one of those cars that instead of when dispatch calls, instead of it coming auditory, it prints on the screen for. And there's a whole bunch of them now that are out there, the cruisers that have the message prints. And she needed it because of her auditory issues. So she got to get one of the cruisers where when dispatch calls with a radio call and puts the address, it prints it. And so she doesn't have to worry about mishearing the information. So she can still do her job as a law enforcement officer and didn't have to quit. And I was like, cool. I was very happy about that. So for adults who've lived their whole lives with this, well, you want to get tested, I'll be happy to test anybody, but you have to ask yourself what the motivation is. Are you willing to do some of the training? Because the auditory training is going to take a little bit of your time, and you got to be willing to do the work. And for adults, it's pretty boring. Most of my adult clients tell me they hated it, but that it helped. And so, kids, it's a little more entertaining. For adults, it's like, really? But it does help. So you meet it halfway, but any skill that can be tested can be trained. And the system remains plastic throughout the lifespan. So if I can reduce or resolve that gap in that deficit in foundational skills, then any gaps that are up there above it, any gaps in reading or language or spelling or math or whatever, I can narrow those. So the goal here of treatment, improve those foundational skills in order to improve function in your life. And then I tell my students that in terms of what kind of treatment, these are the questions you need to ask yourself. Does it work? We're an evidence-based profession. Show me the research, and not just vague research that, oh, research has shown. No, I want to see some hard data here that it works. Should it work? We do a lot of things now that we don't have enough data to prove. But then the next question is, show me the science. Should it work? And somebody starts describing a program to me that says it's going to improve processing by stimulating the cochlea directly through the bone. Yeah, no. You'll hear it, but it won't necessarily improve your processing because that's not how the system works. Does it fit? Don't do fast forward. If the kid has a synthesis issue, I like fast forward. It's a really good program for auditory perceptual training. Won't improve synthesis skills at all. It was never designed to do that. I also have one here, and you can't see it because it's really teeny. It's how much does it cost? Because there are programs out there that are free, and they're quite good. Fast forward, I haven't seen it for under $1,600, and there is no research that says it's better than anything else that's cheaper. So we don't have to mortgage the house to do therapy. Most of these programs are reasonably priced, $100, $9.95 a month. I've got two of them that are free, $150 for the whole training period. Or you can go, the Cadillac and get fast forward for $1,500 or $2,000. But I can't promise you that it'll actually help any more than any other ones. Some of them are junk because they're not grounded in good science. Most of them are pretty good. And I look for the ones that, and if you look for the ones that are going to be a fit. And if you bring me something I've never heard of, those are the three questions I'm going to be looking at when I go to their website. I want to see the research and good research. I want to see the science, and I want to see, does it fit? I saw a study, a research paper on a therapy program. They were touting how good it was. The therapy, the experimental population They said it was students who had known or suspected central auditory processing disorder. I don't even know what a suspected central auditory processing disorder is, other than, gee, I have trouble with what I hear. That's not good science. That is not a well-defined experimental group. That's a poorly defined group, which means if they showed improvement, then hardly, I'm not believing that it was the therapy that did it. And odds are it probably didn't show improvement because their experimental groups were so poorly defined. So I look pretty hard at the research, at the science, and then certainly at the fit. And the fit comes from the testing. So I want to show you some students with some processing issues and then how I would go about intervening. And let's see if I did this the right way. No, I didn't. Okay. So these are the big three. The model that I use to interpret my data, and I'm not married to it. I mean, I'm technically married to it, but I will deviate from it. But it's called the Bellis-Ferry model, and I'm the co-author of it, so I do use it primarily. But basically what Bellis and I came up with is that there's three main central auditory processing disorders. There's a left hemisphere-based problem, which is decoding, discrimination. There's a right hemisphere-based auditory problem, which is all about prosody and temporal processing. And then there's the integration deficit, which relates to corpus callosum function. These are true central auditory processing issues. And this kid here, Grandpa, you believe in ghosts? Oh, you bet I do. I used to have one, darn thing ate everything. He was so ornery, I had to finally give him away. That makes more sense when you realize Grandpa thinks you said goats. See, ghosts, goats. It's a phonemic confusion when you first look at it, but it's auditory. I heard instead of at the end, or he heard this. So this would be some sort of a decoding discrimination problem of some type. And that's all about fine acoustic differences. We believe the site of dysfunction is the left hemisphere, dominant hemisphere of the auditory cortex, possibly some high brainstem involvement, not completely sure yet. But the idea is that it's a poor neural representation at the cortical level. Think auditory wheel of fortune, that signal gets up to your brain and has great big holes in it. And you have to now overwork your language skills to figure out what fills in those holes. And so our students will show problems on my really hard to hear test, where the signal was distorted by filtering, or was distorted by it was going too fast. My kids have some trouble with those perceptual boundaries. I'm not hearing that difference between STR, stra, versus sta, ST, or I'm not hearing the difference between SPR, spra, versus stra, because that's a discrim. Might have some problems with some of the two-ear tests, but not all of them. They'll tell you they can't hear, and you listen to your kids, they'll tell you the truth. They'll consistently tell you, I didn't hear you. If they don't understand, they'll say, I don't get it. Or they'll go, huh? If they're saying what, and I didn't hear you, very likely an auditory issue. If they're saying, huh, and I don't get it, probably more of a language comprehension problem. If they're telling you, I forgot, that could be a legitimate memory issue. Now, in public schools in particular, kids learn very quickly to say, I forgot and I don't know, when the light's shown on them and the teacher wants an answer. So I forgot and I don't know is a quick way to get that spotlight off you and teacher moves on to somebody else. You might know and you might not have forgotten, but I don't know and I forgot gets the pressure off. So you got to be a little bit careful. But you're looking for these kids, you're looking for mishear, lots of what? Fatigues easily because they're just getting really tired because the brain's working too hard. They have trouble in noise, but especially as the noise gets louder, that, okay, I'm a little trouble in noise, but if the noise is getting louder, I can't hear you anymore. They tend to be very slow processors, and then they make mistakes anyway. And think of it, if brains are modeled after computers, think of decoding issues as a typo, that you thought you typed the L, but something's wrong. You had a solid keyboard failure there, and the computer turned it into a K or a P or something else. So kind of think typos and auditory wheel of fortune. All right. The risk areas for these kids, certainly at risk for reading decoding, that's your phonics-based skill. And then by extension, reading comprehension. As I said before, if you can't hear it, you can't spell it. Receptive language could be all over the map. Vocabulary could be weak or not. Syntax could be off. I'm not catching INGs and EDs and plural markers. Semantics. How am I going to tell the difference between park and bark in terms of what it means if I can't hear the difference between park and bark? If I can't discriminate in English, you really expect me to be able to discriminate in French or Spanish or Italian? Listening comprehension. People will complain that you're not paying attention, you're not listening. Some of these kids are very good listeners. Listening is a high level skill, very much under the control of the executive functions. I can have an auditory decoding problem and be the world's greatest listener. I can have absolutely perfect auditory skills and be a horrible listener. But these kids get told, you're not listening, you're not paying attention, you're wrong. And that will lead them to withdrawal and anxiety and depression, and they don't want to communicate, and they're not raising their hand in class because why bother? I'm just going to be wrong anyway because all you adults keep telling me I did it wrong. Decoding, true central auditory processing happens before we attach meaning, which makes it a pre-attentive, pre-linguistic skill. It's at the bottom of that pyramid. Because it happens before you attach meaning, you don't know you made a mistake until after you made it. And usually it's somebody else, probably a grown-up, telling you you're wrong. And you don't know why you're wrong. You just know you are. Because you just, people would say to me as a kid, what do you mean you can't see that? I don't know what to say, I just can't see it. How can you not see that? I can't see it. And these are my kids, they hear the same thing. What do you mean you can't hear that? I don't know, I just didn't hear it. And because you don't know, because you haven't attached meaning, as opposed to other skill sets where you know. If you've got a Wetman, and this is for some of the evaluators who are on the call, if you've got a Wetman, the Wetman auditory discrimination test is good for screening. The Scan-C is very popular among neuropsychologists. It is, in fact, a screening test for auditory processing. Look at spelling. If kids are spelling things phonetically, they don't have a decoding problem because they're giving you the sounds and they're giving you the beats. If they're misspelling it, you gave them the word messed and they spelled it N-E-S-T when it should have been M-E-S-S-E-D because they misheard it. 56, I'm on page 56, I should be on page 66. Teacher told me to do problems 3 through 9. I did 3, 4, 5. They kind of sound alike, 3, 4, 5, 3 through 9. The old ITPA has some sound blending and closure subtests that can screen for this. And these kids that have decoding issues, much better remembering sentences than one word after another. Sentences have more context. They're using the context to fill in the auditory wheel of fortune. All right. Therapy then, management's going to focus on the access. Therapy is going to focus on improving discrimination. So you can do it all different ways. I'm going to let you read that part for yourself because we've been doing discrim therapy since the 1940s. And these are some of the computer programs that are out there. Hear Builder, nice program for the young crowd, 6, 7, 8, even 9-year-olds. Amplify used to be called ClearWorks for ears. I use that one for my older students and adults. LACE from Neurotone, definitely for adults, very possibly the most boring training program on the planet, but it's good. Fast Forward, quite good, very expensive. Listen and Learn comes to us from Australia. Kind of pricey, $400 or $500, but also very good. Games for Heroes and The Listening Room, free. Both sets designed originally for hearing impaired kids. And so you know, if you've got a hearing loss and you just got hearing aids or a cochlear implant, well, you have to learn, your brain has to train itself on all kinds of auditory skills, pattern recognition, integration, discrimination. So I like Games for Heroes in the listening room. Graphics are pretty good on Games for Heroes. It's set up so that not every game has the same number you have to get through. Some are 5, some are 10, some are 20. The kids can see on the screen, some of the games are locked, and the only way to unlock them is to finish the games above. Listening room, there's a lot of information in the listening room. There's a lot of resources, there's videos, there's blogs. If you go out to the listening room, you're looking for point and click exercises. Those are the online programs. They've also got worksheets that can be downloaded that work some of these skills. Tons of good resources, and they're all free at the listening room. So some cool stuff out there. All right, access here. These are the kids that may be an assistive listening device trial. They need the clear speech. We're using ASL for their second language because it's visual, not verbal. These are all pretty straightforward. I mean, they speak to the notion of I can't hear. And so these are the same kinds of things we would do with a student who had a hearing loss. Those are going to work with a kid who has a discrimination issue. All right. Marcia did the 6 problems on page 7. You're supposed to do the 7 problems on page 6. How about yesterday? I did all 4 problems on page 5. Yesterday, we did all 5 problems on page 4. I have to hang up. No, Marcia, I'm going to go stand in the rain. So she's very confused. A lot of directions, a lot of words coming at her. Okay. And then we have this kid. What? Jeremy, I can't understand a word you're saying. Can't you just talk slower? Can't you just listen faster? So slow processing speed. This is the student that has an integration problem. It's the 2 sides of the brain don't want to talk to each other across the corpus callosum. So they get overloaded by too much information coming at once, and it feels like it's coming too fast. It's kind of a non-modality specific issue. It definitely shows up with auditory, but it can also show up in response to visual. These are my kids that have a lot of trouble on the dichotic test, those 2-eared tests, especially for the left ear. And the right hemisphere is in good shape, so they're able to imitate patterns, but the 2 sides don't want to talk to each other, so they struggle to label the patterns. I call them my too much and how to kids, because there's an underdevelopment of the highways in your head. So integration's about these highways in our head, and we know from living here in the Chicago area that we can get from place to place pretty quickly if the infrastructure is pretty good. Try to go from Evanston to Oak Park. Not easy, because you either have to go in an L, so you have to go out to the tollway and come around, or you got to take Lakeshore Drive to the Eisner and come out, or you have to snake your way through on like Cicero and Central and that way. No good way to get here. And if something's backed up someplace, it slows everything down. Bad, too much snow on the Eisenhower slows down the everything else because you can't get out to the Ike or an accident. So the inner hemispheric connections up here are the highways in your head. The more we mature, they begin developing at birth. They're not fully mature until mid to late 20s. The stronger they become, the quicker information moves from one side of the brain to the other. So this is a hardware problem. You've got a central processing unit that is a 386 processor, and you need an Intel. Now, why is everybody all about 5G? Who cares? 5G, 4G, 3G, more towers. Cell phone connections, there are more towers. 5G, it goes faster. Regular phone cables. I remember when we all got fiber optic, it was so exciting because the signals went faster. And so that's what integration is all about. It's about moving information between and among areas of the brain quickly. And if I can move it quickly, then I can do multitasking and I can transition more quickly. And I don't need a lot of time. These are my kids that they're the tortoise. And I tell them that. I say, be the tortoise, not the hare. Tortoise won the race. And they will be accurate, but they take longer. Listening in noise. Have them do something they're really good at. You could have a parade, it won't bother them. give them a test, somebody next to them coughs and they lose their concentration because it's about how much, too much, and how to. Too much is coming at me, and I don't know how to make it all coalesce into usable components, usable pieces. And so I get overloaded and overwhelmed. All right. So reading, these are classically learning disabled kids. Reading, written language, other sensory. A lot of these kids have already been identified by an occupational therapist when they were littler as having sensory processing or some sort of visual motor problem. And if you've got a kid that was identified by the OT as having a sensory integration problem, chances are I will find the same thing when I ask them to deal with auditory. Language tends not to be affected too much, but if it is, it's syntax. I have a lot of trouble with grammar, passive voice versus active voice, subjective clauses kind of figuring out because it feels like it's too much. Look at their spelling. These are the kids who can spell it the way it sounds, but they don't know how to spell. Sentences are harder than unrelated words because, like I said, they're memorizing the words, but sentences, it's too much. You can look at the synthesis test and phonologic processing. That's a component of most phonologic tests. Look at their other sensory integration. What's the OT say about visual motor or auditory visual or auditory motor? I like to use the alphabet. This will work if a child is 8 or older. You say the alphabet. And the child starts A, B, C, D. Okay, good. Some of my kids want to sing it. So they'll start singing to me. 6 and 7-year-olds always sing. So kids start singing A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And I'm like, no, say it. If the student can then turn around and do A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, then there's probably they're a pretty good integrator. If the child all of a sudden is like A, B, C, did I say D? And they've slowed way down. They're starting to be more inaccurate about it. And it's because they don't know the alphabet. They know 26 separate letters that they've tried to memorize. And it's hard to memorize 26 things that are not related to each other. So I like to use my alphabet game with that. So not a good synthesizer, not good at putting things together. So how do I improve that in the real world? Well, don't throw so much at them at once, okay? And let's do some treatment that focuses on interhemispheric communication. So one of the things is this dichotic listening training that the schools say, oh, it's clinical, it's clinical. Yeah, it is kind of clinical training-wise, but it's absolutely educationally relevant. Because if you can't process one measly number in your right ear and at the same time one number in your left ear, how in the world are you going to take notes in class with all that information coming at once? So integration reflects neural capacity, and the better integrated I am, the more information I can take in at once, and the more information I can attach meaning to, and then I can write notes. These are my older students that can't take notes, because that requires looking and listening at the same time, and they're not good at that. So some of the computer programs, these are the two biggies to do dichotic training online. Zookeeper, hysterically funny, about $100. You move animals around, it's funny. CapDots, $400 or $500, a little more expensive. Lots of numbers and words. Kind of feels like it's training to the test for me. I like Zookeeper a little better. But both of them, 10, 15, CapDots has got like 20 years of research behind it. These are both very, very strong programs for improving dichotic listening in children. Your classroom accommodations, don't make them look and listen. Let them do one or the other. Let them do them sequentially and not at the same time. Don't rephrase. You rephrasing to somebody, the person to whom you're rephrasing, you're operating on the assumption that they know you're saying the same thing with just different words. But if they didn't get all the words in the first place, all they think is that now you're giving them a whole bunch of new words. Don't ever rephrase to a weak integrator. Repeat exactly what you said, and then put a cue in, put a demonstration in. So go downstairs, get the big book off the top shelf of the bookcase. And the child says, go downstairs and get what? And you look at him and say, top shelf, bookcase, big book. and you kind of telegraph it. And then you ask them to paraphrase, what are they supposed to do? What are you supposed to do? 1, 2, 3. And better still, tell them how many things are coming. I need you to do 3 things. I need you to do 2 things. Music while they work and study, lots of movement breaks, lots of external structure. I need you to do it like this. Here's an outline. Here's a checklist, so that they start to learn how to do that for themselves. And they will start to then organize information that same way. They'll go, okay, I have this project to do. Step 1, step 2, step 3, and they'll get into the habit. I don't worry too much about my weak integrators, because age is on their side. These skills get stronger as a function of increasing age, particularly explosive at 6, big improvement, 9, 10, 11, big improvement, puberty, big improvement, somewhere out there, 18 to 21, big improvement. Excuse me. And these kids learn a really strong work ethic because they have to. And so I don't worry too much about my weak integrators, because they find ways to, they need to learn differently. They need more repetition. They need more time. One of my 19-year-old clients came to me. He was going to go to school over at Loris in Iowa. He said, I'm taking 9 hours. So is that the minimum for full-time student? He said, yeah. And I said, so what does that mean? And he said, well, it's going to take me 5 years to finish. And I said, and how do you feel about that? And he said, well, he said, football players take 5 years and nobody cares. And then he looked side to side and he leaned over the table and he very quietly said, besides, Dr. Ferry, when I'm 35 and I have kids of my own, nobody's going to give a damn that it took me 5 years to get through college. And I went, there's the attitude I'm looking for. So my weak integrators, like I said, I don't worry too much about them, because they tend to be the squeaky wheels. And so the accommodations come and they learn what they need. And so they're a little more proactive. I worry more about my weak discriminators, because it gets misidentified as other kinds of problems. It gets misidentified as anxiety or depression. Now, the one thing I will say about my weak integrators, these are the kids who tell you they're stupid, that they look around the room, they see other kids able to do something, and they'll turn around and tell you they're stupid, because it's just not coming together for them. They know it should, and it's not. And so they will call themselves stupid, which we want to get rid of that. No, elves. I said, send me 50 elves. So we're mishearing running speech. We got Elvises instead of elves. And then multiple meanings and stress. Oh, hey, I'm sorry, I didn't know you had company, Fitch. No bigs, Dustin. Called Caroline to come over this morning so we can brush our teeth together. Okay, I'm pretty sure I'll be sorry about asking this, but why? Commercial we saw said, dentists all agree, you can't avoid tooth decay by brushing alone. Okay, so no, can't avoid tooth decay by brushing alone, not brushing alone. So multiple meaning word there, miss the stress. This is the prosodic deficit and timing cues. Right hemisphere based auditory processing disorder, pattern recognition problems. Prosody is the music of our language. It's the ebb and the flow and the rise and the fall. It's the flavor, the spice. Without it, everything drones, and it's boring, and it's dull, and it's flat, and it's colorless. It's the music of our life. In fact, I teach my graduate students how to, what sound color makes, because sound has color and color has sound. And these are my kids that don't have that appreciation. For them, it's that in one ear and out the other. And it starts with a rise and a fall, and then after a few sentences, it just flattens out on them, and everything kind of sounds like Charlie Brown grown-ups. Wah, 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 wah. Again, they show some issues on the dichotic test, but their biggest tell is that they can't imitate those patterns, that they can't get the rhythm of it, they can't get the pitch changed. They're just kind of all over the map. Poor affect is a big one. If you've got kids with whom you're working that they're not a lot of affect to you, it could be because that's the way the world comes at them. So they're kind of monotone because that's what it sounds like to them. They tend to lose their focus after just a few sentences. They misunderstand the intent. My colleague, Dr. Bellis, has an acquired prosodic deficit from a car accident. It was misdiagnosed as PTSD, and it was not discovered until she went back to work and was doing an evaluation. and her students pointed out to her that she was missing everything. She's like, what? And they tested her, and she has a acquired right hemisphere-based prosodic deficit. And so it's very difficult for her. She has trouble regulating her own speech patterns. Sometimes she's a little much, and we kind of have to look at her and go, take it down a notch. And sometimes she doesn't get the facial expressions, and it's because she's not catching the patterns. So it impacts analysis, synthesis, and meaning attachment, but on the right side of the brain. So this one's tricky sometimes to catch because it does look like other things too. It looks a lot like Asperger's, because you see problems in social and pragmatic language. If you've got a child who tells you they don't like music, that's not normal. You may not like reggae, you may not like hip hop, you may not like country western, but there's got to be music you like unless you can't wrap your head around music. So if you've got a child who truly does not appreciate music, doesn't want to listen to it, they need an evaluation. If you're seeing a student who's been diagnosed with nonverbal communication problems, they should be tested for a prosodic deficit because it's not nonverbal, it's non-speech. Academics could be totally intact. It all could be showing up as a behavioral, social pragmatic behavioral problem. Okay. I use my alphabet song. I want my kids to sing the alphabet. One little girl one day did A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and I said, no, sing it, sweetie. She said, I am. I'm like, oh, dear, dear, dear. I had one youngster, and this was after Hannah had mentioned the LMNO. I said to him, what's the middle letter of the alphabet? And his mom started counting them out. And he said, well, I don't know what it's called. And I said, but you know which one it is, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, what do you call it? He said, it's the big one in the middle, right? And I said, yeah. And he said, it's the lemon letter. And I said, yes, it is. It's the lemon letter. And his mom looked at me and said, lemon letter? I said, yeah, LMNO, lemon. And so look at music, look at other patterning skills, look at their expressive speech. When these kids are 5 and even 6, it's really cute that they member going on cation, or you're not supposed to do that, or we did experiments at school. But when they're 8 or 9 and telling you they member going on cation in Michigan, that's a prosodic deficit. I translated it for Hannah, and the little girl looked at me and said, that I said. And I'm like, yeah, that's what I said. Yeah. Look at their expressive speech. If they're dropping syllables, mushing stuff together, you got a potential problem with prosody. If their written language is leaving whole things out, they're not putting in periods, commas, exclamation points. They're leaving whole syllables out when they spell, not reading fluently or with feeling. They're not pausing at the commas. They're not stopping at the periods. They're reading to the end of the line and then coming down here as though it's a whole new thought, and not finding the ends that are supposed to be there, because those symbolic cues, those are the markers we use for auditory. I mean, all these emojis that we have for tweets and stuff, you go and look for the emoji you want that's going to express your tone of voice. We put things in capital letters because we're shouting at somebody. We boldface it because we're saying, hey, pay attention to this. We use all kinds of symbols to convey that auditoriness that's in the message, the flavor, so that the person reading the tweet knows you're being tongue-in-cheek and knows you were being sarcastic, and they don't question you after and you say to them, oh, I was being sarcastic. Really? It didn't sound like sarcasm. Okay. All right. So this is all about analyzing, synthesizing, and attaching meaning. So we're going to have a combination of interventions here. Therapy-wise, we can train these skills. Insane Earplane from that same group, Acoustic Pioneer, is all about training pattern recognition. You get to fly a plane. ClearWorks, which is now Amplify, has activities in it that target temporal resolution, which is the ability to catch the boundaries. The Fast Forward program uses temporally altered speech, as does the LACE program uses temporally altered speech. So there are computer programs that can train these skills. In the classroom, it's a combination of bottom up and top down. I need repetition with emphasis on keywords. I need clear speech. Clear speech is speaking a little more slowly and a and pausing for emphasis. It's an actual technique, and you can learn it in 5 easy exercises to learn how to speak more clearly and still speak fairly quickly. Adults can speak at 180 words per minute. The average 6-year-old can process 125 words per minute. The average middle schooler can do 135 words per minute. We all need to slow down when we are talking to children. They simply can't hear as many words as we can. Animated teacher is quite good for these students who's a little bigger, a little over the top. Clear language, lots of parameters. So you see, we're using some of the things that we would use with a weak integrator and some of the things that we'd use with a weak discriminator, because it's those two problems together. It's just right side of the brain. All right, so I'm almost out of time. So I want to talk about the secondaries. My colleague, Dr. Bellis, does not talk about these too much anymore because they're not auditory. They're non-modality specific, but they're not auditory problems. There's something else. But I point out to her that you have to talk about them because they show up on these testing profiles and they look like they might be auditory. And if we don't do a good job, we're going to misidentify it as an auditory issue when it's not. The associative deficit, that's a language impairment. Output organization, that's a cognitive executive function problem. Okay, Fitch, Call of Duty Black Ops 2. You're Dave Mason, son of Alex Mason from the original Black Ops. Got it. Fire at will. Fitch, which one's will? Literal interpretation, multiple meaning. We came home from the dry cleaner stand. It was about 5. So when we get home, can I use my sidewalk chalk? I said, no, it's too wet. She said, my chalk's not wet. I said, no, the pavement is wet. She asked me what that meant. I told her. She said, why don't you just use all those words? I said, pavement is one word that means all those words. She said, they'll let you do that? I said, yes, they will let you do that. That's associative. The nebulous they, rules of language. Who says it's I before E except after C? They do. Who says that T-O-U-G-H is tough, but T-H-O-U-G-H is though, and T-H-R-O-U-G-H is through, and T-H-O-U-G-H-T is thought? Who makes these rules? They do. And these are my kids that they don't get the nebulous they. We think it's a disconnect between your auditory and your language center. Information is just not getting over there to the language centers. You're not a good translator. It's a software issue. It's like trying to use Windows on a Mac without a converter of some kind. So they have issues in trying to manipulate language targets, misunderstanding meanings, taking things very literally, linguistically inappropriate responses, may appear compliant, non-compliant. These are the kids who are daydreaming, that they're listening to you, but it's just kind of going over their heads now. And it's just kind of, so now I'm going away and I'm thinking about something else and my mind's starting to wander. I look like I'm daydreaming. Noise doesn't bother them any more than it bothers anybody else. But it's all about the language. They just, I don't get it. And these are, I hate this deficit because it looks like attention deficit disorder. These kids get underestimated in terms of their intelligence. These are some of the smartest kids I have ever worked with. One of my 19-year-olds came back. He had 2 patents already. He was at Rose-Hulman, which is the engineering school over in Indiana. And he came back for his re-eval so he could keep his accommodations. And he said, can I ask you a question? Well, you just did. I said, but yeah, you can ask me a question. He said, Dr. Ferry, do you test adults? I said, well, let's see, you're 18 and you're an adult. So yes, I test adults. He said, oh no. He said, I meant people who are old like you. And I'm thinking, yeah, okay, so we got to work on that social language just a little bit more. I said, yes, I test people who are old like me. Why do you ask? He said, I think the chair of my department has the same processing problem as me. And I said, you guys are all over engineers over there, right? He goes, oh, everybody's an engineer, everything engineering. And I said, oh, sweetie. I said, you all have the same processing problem. I said, that's why you're engineers. I said, you like the ones and the zeros and the black and the white. I said, you don't want the I before E except after C. He's like, oh yeah, it's true. And one of my little guys, we were talking about rules of language. he said, they're not rules. I said, why not? He said, because there's too many exceptions to them. And as he was leaving the office, he turned around and he said, and you know, Dr. Ferry, they're not even good suggestions. And I said, no, they're not. And I worked with one little guy. School district said his IQ was 79. I tested him. He had this profile. I said, there's no way his IQ is 79. I said to him, true or false, the sky is blue. He sat in the booth. He's like, well, in winter it's gray, so it wouldn't be blue. And at night it's dark. So I said, stop it. I said, would most people agree the sky is blue? He continued to debate that. Most. And he looked at me and said, yes. I said, okay, go play. He took 3 steps out of the booth, turned back around, and said, but Dr. Ferry, you know it's not really blue, don't you? It just looks that way because of the way the light bends when it hits the atmosphere. I said, can we get a non-language biased IQ test for this youngster? Because he has a language issue, okay? And that's what we wanted. We look at the WIS-5 and you look at the C-Tony. His real IQ, they gave him the C-Tony. His real IQ was 129. School district wanted to put him in a cognitively impaired program. I went, no, he's smarter than most of the people who are doing the testing. They think outside the box. We're all supposed to think outside the box. These kids live outside the box, and they're going to figure out how to grow food on Mars for the whole planet, and how to feed everybody on $1.50 a day, and how to solve climate change, and how to build a better mousetrap. They just don't really care about I before E except after C. So they tend to be kind of literal versus the abstract, and they don't get the joke, they don't get the wordplay because they don't get it. And it's just kind of going over their heads. Because we're looking at a language issue, your management's focusing on improving linguistic quality. Be very clear linguistically, and your treatment is going to be speech language therapy. We're not going to drill these skills, we're going to teach them. Might be word association, might be categorization, might be inferencing, might be idioms. I don't know, because I don't do that testing. I turn that over to my speech pathologist. But speak the same language. Say what you mean what you say. If as a parent or a teacher, you're finding yourself saying to your child, but that's not what I meant, you've come up against a language barrier. Because if you meant what you said, they'd have gotten it. Hannah asked me when she was about 9, she said, how come you can mean the same thing and you can say it a whole bunch of different ways, or you can say the same thing, you can make it mean a whole bunch of different things? I said, it's English. I said, it'd be boring otherwise. She said, yeah, but it's so hard. I said, yes, it is. I said, but otherwise it's no fun. So non-language biased IQ, not non-verbal intelligence, but a non-verbal test of intelligence. Okay, that's the difference. So non-language bias, rule-based learning, lots of note-taking help. And then finally, help, my hand somehow got twisted around. I'm facing backwards. I can read the tag on my shirt. I can see down my back. Oh, wait, there's my belly button. I must have my shirt on backward. Never mind, I got my head straight after all. Oh, I wouldn't go that far. So impulsive, we do know that impulsivity is a characteristic of some of our students who have some executive challenges, although it can come from other sources as well. But certainly, again, here's some confusion with lots of instructions and keeping things in the right order. This is potentially an output organization issue. I'm having trouble getting it back out again. One of my moms told me this. She said, I don't think my son's computer is spooling to his printer. And I said, what a great way to characterize it, because it's all in there and just cannot seem to get his ducks in a row to do what he needs to do. Can't get it back out. So on my testing, lots of errors when there's more than one target in each ear versus just one target. Trouble in noise, regardless of how loud it is. Sequencing errors. These are my kids that they can recognize all those patterns, but they say them backwards. So instead of saying high, high, low, they're saying low, low, high. They've got the right pattern, but they're saying it wrong. So look at what it looks like in a class. Disorganized, impulsive, poor planner, speech production issues, word finding, recall. This is all the characteristics, or most of the characteristics, of those executive function issues. So again, not a true central auditory disorder, Management, see a combination of quantity, like a poor integrator, teaching rules, like the associative, and then the treatment, we're going to be working on the executive responses and executive function and execution and expressive skills. These are some general programs that are useful for listening. Brain HQ need to be pretty much high school or older, but a really clever set of games. It's an app for the phone, costs about $8 a month, has auditory, visual, and auditory visual targets. Very, very clever. When I first saw it, my first thought was, wow, they took that whole continuum and made a bunch of games for each level of it. Interactive metronome is a pattern recognition sequencing game. It can improve patterning, sequencing, and motor planning. My biggest complaint about interactive metronome, it's very, very popular among occupational therapists. No offense to any OTs on the line, but if you're doing this with anybody under the age of 7, you're wasting your time, because patterning really comes into its own between the ages of 4 and 7. And so if you're trying to get a 4 or 5-year-old to do this, it's going to be way too frustrating because the skill's not there yet. We should be holding off on interactive metronome until the kids are probably at least 7. Lipreading.org, online program for improving use of lip reading and speech reading cues. Just some fun sites. Super Duper Inc. is Here Builder, also has some language stuff. Smarty Ears is fun, virtual speech. Hamaguchi, speech pathologist from California, specializes in social pragmatic language. She has listening power. She's got listening power for preschool, K to 3, and 4th grade and up, because she believes that listening is a social pragmatic skill, which she's right. And they're cute. Graphics are good. I don't know, $18, $19. Managing those output issues, maybe an assistive listening device. You can see we're pre-teaching rules. We use music very often. There's interactive metronome again. Some good research coming out of Northwestern on using music for a wide variety of skills in terms of reducing aging effects and discrimination and working memory. There's some pretty exciting stuff coming out of that area of study, and how we can use music to improve not just auditory processing, but the related skills as well. This is just a summary of the levels of processing: acoustic, phonologic, linguistic, executive, what kind of tasks the system has to do. I hear it, I know it, I get it, I can use it. What kind of assessment, what kind of management, and then what kind of treatment we might be considering. These are my M3 cubed. These are my 9 tips for processing. These 9 are for teachers and parents. Gain the attention, kids need repetition, show me. Kids don't process as fast as adults, too much. Give the parameters, tag words, listening breaks. These are what I teach my kids. Twice as nice, mind over mutter, wait for it. I'll be watching you, noise and noise. Peter gave me that one. He said it was called noise because it was annoying. Oh dear, it's not clear. Be the tortoise, not the hare. Go with the flow. ABC and 1, 2, 3, going in order will set you free. These are some of the games that I like to encourage families to play. And you can see I've got the processing skills. Plexers, that's a trade name. It's actually a book. They're called Plexers. They are like rebus puzzles. They're a lot of fun. Clever Endeavor, if you can still find it. Feely Bag, that's, you put a bunch of objects in a bag and you reach in the bag, and without looking at it, you say what it is by just touching it. So I call it Feely Bag when I play it. Upwards, Taboo, Simon Says, yeah, okay. Ending the sound game, your word starts with the last sound of the word before yours. So if you say cat, the next person's word has to start with a t. It's hard for adults to play because we can spell. And so we want to start it with the letter and not the sound. So, and kids do better at it than some adults. Mad Gab, if you've ever played it, hysterically funny, works on patterning. Rags to Riches is a board game. I don't know if you can still get it. It might be out of print. Works on idioms. These are, again, just some resources. This is the Oticon I mentioned. You can learn clear speech in 5 easy exercises. Go to that website there. It's a hearing aid company. Communication's a two-way street. If you're interested in states that and their status with ASL, this is a document that the states that recognize American Sign Language. In Illinois, American Sign Language is recognized for both high school and collegiate credit. Some high schools have even started teaching it. A good book, that pretty fat, third edition by Geffner and Swain, that covers sort of auditory processing, language, how it relates to attention, just some good information, reads pretty well. Our professional practice portal at the American Speech Language Hearing Association. I'm not entirely sure you can get into this from the public site. You might have to use a speech pathologist or audiologist to access it, but I thought there was some stuff on the public site on this topic as well. Again, just a summary of some of the programs that are out there. I think that's everything. You guys can read the summary for yourself. And it's 9 o'clock and a couple minutes for questions, I guess.
Okay, so I will take over the screen and I will share the list of questions that I have compiled. Folks,
Okay.
keep throwing them in the comments. We will see what we can get through. First of all, huge thanks, Dr. Terry. This was amazing. And let's see if I can manage the technology. Continue. Okay, so we will start with questions from before the talk. Okay, so we have some questions that people submitted before the talk, and I think most of these are partially answered. So if you were the question asker, okay, please speak up if you feel like your question has not been properly answered. And you know what? Let me just stop recording for this portion. How do I stop recording? Hold on. Sorry, technical difficulties.